Well, today is November 1st, 2016, and I'm interviewing Gerald Horn at the Illinois State Library in Springfield, Illinois. My name is Sue Burkholder, and I will be the interviewer. Gerald, or I call you Jerry. Jerry, for the recording, would you please state in what war and branch of service that you served?
I was in Vietnam, in the Army.
Okay. And let's see, you are 73 years old, and your birthday, or you were born on July 7th, 1943, correct?
Right.
Okay. All right. Well, let's start with a little bit of you telling us a little bit about your family, like where you were born, maybe just a little bit about your parents, what their occupations were.
Yeah. Well, I was born out in a rural New Berlin. Woodside Township is the official birthplace, and my dad was a tenant farmer, so we lived in a small house on the farm. The house was next to Woodreef Cemetery. So as growing up, as really young, before I was even in school, that was kind of a playground for me. So I was friends with the caretaker of the cemetery. I knew what not to do and all that. So I kind of enjoyed life when I was growing up. Probably these days would have been considered poor. Mm-hmm. So, but we raised our own gardens and all that. And my mom canned. Mm-hmm. So I went to school in the fort. My dad, as I mentioned, was a tenant farmer. They had livestock and raised crops. Back then, there was everything was horse-drawn for using it for the crops. So there's machinery, but the farmer had the horse-drawn, like the plows and the mower, and so everything was done that way. As it turned out, by the time my dad retired, he was in a self-propelled combine, the air conditioner and AM/FM stereo radio. So he went through the gamut of technology. Anyway, I went to when school came, I went to a 3-room schoolhouse in a small town of Berlin, which was rumored that at one time it was like 3 votes as becoming the state capital of Illinois. And let's see, what else?
Siblings? Any siblings?
Well, I had a sister that was also born in that same house, and I guess by that time we had a phone. Her name is Karen Sue, and my dad was first of 15 kids, and he was when World War II came around, he was the oldest of all the sons, and so he had to stay back and help on the farm. The next 3 brothers were all in World War II. One was I think was a cook, and the one was in the armored tank division, and another one was artillery. And so those 2 ended up with a hearing loss. Mm-hmm. The one that was in the tank was he had to read lips, and he ended up working in a Harley Davidson in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. No, not Harley Davidson, Biggs and Stratton. Okay. Small engine. In high school, I went to New Berlin High School in 4 years. Growing up, I did a lot of fishing and creek fishing and pond fishing and helping with the garden, and I probably started around 10 or 12 taking care of a garden and mowing. Did all the mowing, and so That's helped develop my immune system, because you had to, no matter what, like we had livestock and they had to be taken care of, no matter how sick you were or anything. So.
Yeah. When you were, well, either during school or after school, did you start an occupation or a job outside of the farm work?
After high school, I was I was graduated in May. During the summers, I would do yard work for other people or gardens. And matter of fact, my fourth and fifth grade teacher was turns out was neighbors that went during the time I was in high school, and I took over her garden and yard and mowing. So that was a kind of a coincidence, but
sure. So you did have uncles that were in the military, and was there any other family members that went in the military besides your uncles that you know of?
Well, I had an aunt on my mom's side that was in the. She became a nurse and was a nurse during the Army time, so she got credit for being in the military as a nurse during World War II. And I had another uncle by marriage on my dad's side that was in the Army. Well, there's probably more of them, but probably most of them around that age was in the Army, or military anyway.
Sure.
Now, he had another uncle that was in the Navy, but I don't think he was old enough to be in World War II. And he's still alive. And let's see, my dad's all gone. Most of them are gone now, but
yeah. So, did you enlist or were you drafted?
I was drafted.
Okay.
I was let's see, about a year and a half earlier, my wife, got a draft notice, and my wife and I were dating at the time, as before we was married, and she's called to find out if I was married, would I still get drafted, and I wouldn't get drafted if I was married, so we got married. We was going to get married that year anyway, on April 1st, and I was drafted, so we got married on March 26th, so beat it by 5 days, so I ended up getting drafted anyway, so because we didn't have kids yet.
And how did your family and friends feel about you going into the service?
I don't know how they felt. My wife didn't care for it, but
yeah. All right.
My dad, there was no emotion in our family, immediate family at all. And there's never any I love yous or hugs or anything like that. I guess it was like for me, expected to just help out. There's no allowances or anything. But when I was time for him to leave, my dad walked away from the car to his crying. So never saw him do that.
Yeah. And how did that make you feel when you saw him?
Again, it got me emotional. Even thinking about it, even now, it's that way.
Sure.
Then when I came back, my mom was just totally opposite. She just said hi or something like that, and when I got back from her, she's still that way. She don't know love or doesn't show love or anything.
Well,
that's that story.
Yeah. When you went off to basic training, then those first few days, how was it? What were your feelings? Like, was it just okay, or was it like a shock to your system?
No, it's just okay. That's what, every guys was going through that too, so it's just what was happening at the time. Vietnam was just kind of getting started.
Okay. And what were the early days of training like? What was your life like there for a while?
Well, after I graduated from high school, I got a job the following January 2nd, the day after New Year's, and with a local grocery store. Now, my boss at the store was that had the store had a son that worked in the grocery store that was a butcher, and he was 3 years older than me, and then he had a daughter that was doing something else that was 2 years older, and he had another daughter that was a classmate of mine all the way through high school, and then he had two sons after that, about 10 years after her, and then by the time I got drafted, a couple more were born. Well, one was born, and Hank was born while I was in the Army. Anyway, I'd been there 5 years almost 5 years when I got drafted. So, now what was the question again? I interrupted.
That's okay. After you were drafted and going into basic,
and starting out basic training, I was 158 pounds. And I was 158 pounds when I came out of basic training, but it's a different 158 pounds, because when I went in, it was winter time and cold, and our first thing was like 3 miles away from a company where whatever we was doing, and the sergeants we had a double time back with all of our stuff carrying on, and there's the guys falling out and of a formation jogging back, and they's being handled by the chewed out and their finger fur falling out by the sergeants and the platoon leaders, and so I said, there's no way I was trying heaving off. By the time I got back up, there's no way I was going to not make it back to the company. So I did, and everything's fine after that. And I was able to go through everything without any problems. And there's some of them, like a straight A student from Notre Dame had enlisted, and he would get picked on. So because he's the most uncoordinated guy around. So he's all over him when he mess up.
Were there any memorable instructors?
Well, our company sergeant was platoon sergeant, was married and divorced while I was in basic training. He is known to be a beer drinker on the weekend, so he's a good guy, though. I liked him real well.
So as you've gone through basic training now, and you made it, and you're through, then where did you go next? Any advanced training?
Well, here's where another thought come through me. When I was being interviewed to find out where I was going after basic training, as it turned out, because keep in mind I'd worked at the grocery store, and this guy was from, one doing the interview was from Petersburg, Petersburg. Wasn't too far from New Berlin. And he had, because there's a lot of Horns in Petersburg that wasn't related. There's a large Horn family in the Petersburg area. None of them were related to the Horns in the Berlin area. And so he asked me if I had any relation there. I said, well, no Horns, but I have some cousins there. So it turns out he knew my cousins. And so then from there it went that I chose the AIT in Fort Eustis, Virginia, which was for supply school. So from the supply school, that's when I got to Cameron in Vietnam.
Okay. So supply school was...
Oh, also,
yes.
One of those cousins was in Fort Eustis, was living. He was living and stationed there near Fort Eustis. He was in the Navy, because there's shipyards there at Fort Eustis, Virginia. And, well, not where Fort Eustis, but it's Navy Yards right by there.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was in the Navy and living there at the time, near Fort Eustis. So I had to babysit once or twice while I was there on the weekend.
Mm-hmm. So your advanced training taught you about taking care of supplies.
So yeah, parts of transportation supplies. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you finished your AIT,
Mm-hmm.
and then where did you go from there?
Then I was went through St. Louis to go to process through San Francisco. And when I went through there, I said, "Well, that's Southern California. I won't need any fatigue jacket." So I had it on the bottom of and where I'm going, Vietnam is a hot climate, so I'm not going to need that. So I didn't figure I would need it. But when I was processing, it was cold and rainy. I needed a fatigue jacket, but I wasn't going to mess everything up in the duffel bag that I had packed away and have to repack again. So I did without it while I was processing. And as it turned out, I figure later there was after I was out of the Army, I was watching the World Series, and they had a big earthquake, San Francisco. It was a big earthquake then, and I was watching the World Series at the time. It was started going on, and so it turned out to be pretty bad, and bridges collapsed and everything. And I was thinking that might have been the bridge, because we came through Oakland and probably crossed that bridge to San Francisco, because that connected the two. So I probably, that was a bridge I'd been across. So we got processed through and was heading to Vietnam. And we went to Fort Travis Air Force Base, I think it was called, to go to Vietnam, and stayed overnight. Had to refuel in Japan, Tokyo, Japan, about 3 or 4 in the morning on the way to Cam Ranh. So Cam Ranh is where we passed through. And while we was being processed, didn't know where I was going yet. The flight went out at night time and was heading toward Hanoi. And a little bit later, they came back. I said, "What happened? Why? I thought you." Well, I said we couldn't land. The runway is full of holes. They'd been mortared. And I thought, what am I doing here? I wasn't ready for this. So luckily, I stayed there, Cam Ranh Bay. Turns out they had the third largest supply depot in the world at that time, and got assigned for 423rd Repair Parts Company, and was assigned a supply depot, nuts and bolts aisles. It was probably, that's all it was in. I had 3 aisles. It was nothing but nuts and bolts. And I figured that must be from World War I all the way through that was ever fit on any machine or anything. So I had that aisle. So while I was in there, I remember, 2 weeks after I was there, the company commander called me into his office and said, "You learn quick." And that my previous employer there in New Berlin, he had said the same thing after I was there 2 weeks. You learn pretty quick. So, okay. So I remember one day I was talking to, there was a 2-star general visiting the warehouse, and I have no idea what we talked about, but I was talking to him for a little bit, and so I don't know if any of that led up to my getting assigned to the helps get the central locator started. Apparently it did. Like I said, I have no idea what we talked about. It might have had something to do with how my answers was and everything, how I happened to be picked for that. So we got the central locator started. It's probably in July. I went over there. It was April 19th, I think, was when April 19th was when we landed there, and so it was somewhere in July when that central locator got started, according to my my assignment thing. And it was started in our warehouse. Now back then that was before computers and all that. We had IBM cards that we had to look at, go through to find the location of the parts. And we had a central, was in a warehouse, so there's one bulb hanging from the ceiling over all those IBM cards, and they needed the ink refilled, I think, because it was real clear. They decided, because that was a problem, so we decided to move to our own little Quantahunt. So I got picked, there's 12-hour shifts back then, and I got picked to on the night shift. So we watched them, or did that, and could see it a lot better then. So that's where I was for the rest of the time. We had a note of interest. We had you didn't know who was signed, where it was coming from. We had a guy that was from one of the Carolinas, I don't remember which, that came out of a motor pool. He's a mechanic in a motor pool, and they brought him in to be a cook. And that guy could fry chicken. It's really good.
Go ahead.
There's a time, probably one of the best steaks I ever had was somehow got to us from what some officers were supposed to have gotten. They had electric skillet, and it was cooked in electric skillet for our night shift, and it was really good. Probably because we weren't supposed to have it. It tasted a lot better.
So, I mean, in the position you were in, did you feel, or like when people needed things, that's what you did? You found what they needed and passed it on?
Yeah, that's just the reason was started to hasten the process of getting their parts to them. It came to, all the requisitions for parts from all over Vietnam came to us. And that's where we write the location and send it out. And all the, they might have had a number of different kind of parts that went to different locations.
Okay. So, and the weather in Vietnam at the time you were there was?
Hot. There's one time, well, they always had a monsoon sometime during a certain time during the year, which apparently was winter time back here. And I went on R&R. A friend, now as I mentioned, another guy I went on R&R with was in the hooch, same hooch that I was in. Where we stayed was called Hooches. And he happened to be in AIT, in the same building that I was in. So we became friends, and we went to Penang Island, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And we hired a guide to guide us around at that time. And when we got back, they had their monsoon while we was gone. So they had said that the water just like a river going through down, because it's kind of on a hill, and it kind of went down down the sidewalk where we were supposed to be, where we stayed.
So I was just going to ask you, you said you made friends with the gentleman, and did you have many close friendships when you were there?
Well, him, and there's some guys I would like to see. I'd like to know if they're still around, or because that's been 49 years ago now.
Are there any that you were able to keep in contact with?
Just the one I mentioned. It was, we sent each other Christmas cards. He's up in Chicago. He's a huge Cub fan, which is in. Of course, growing up, he lived a few blocks from there, from Wrigley Field. So he is a Cub fan before he is a White Sox. They're kind of against each other, crosstown rivals.
Sure. So what did you do for entertainment or relaxation?
We had cookouts. We went out on the beach. Since I worked the night shift, I'd get off and get about 5 hours sleep, tops probably, and then go out on the beach and body surf and on the weekends, and yep. The water was cold. Actually, it got cold there too in the wintertime, but there's also one day that never hear about these. I guess that they don't count, but it was supposedly 145 degrees, and that's kind of heat there was, and Cameron was all sand. Bob Hope was there, the USO. And he referred to it while I was there as the largest cat box in the world. And so looking toward the stage, see on TV they don't see all those cue cards and stuff. So he was reading a lot of what he is saying up there. So I was there during that time. I forget who was his guest. I don't know if Jerry Colonna was with him. He was with him often, I know, but he was a comic guy with a big mustache back then. That was pretty. USO, they're pretty popular still, and they were really neat to have around. We had one in Cameron.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events that happened? I know you've mentioned a couple things maybe, but anything you can think of?
Well, New Year's, Christmas morning, supposedly we was well guarded and everything, but they caught a guy that turned pacing, because the supply depot was closed down at the Christmas morning, and saw a guy pacing off steps, and that turned out to be a North Vietnamese guy, I guess. So he's going to pace off steps to try to find the range for a missile or something, or mortar. We don't know if he had missiles in. That's how they called him. And
go ahead.
Well, as far as that part goes, Tet Offensive was a big deal. Now, I was still there then, and working on it at night shift, and heard a bunch of noise, and they had saw some flames, and that was at the air base, and they'd hit some empty tanks, fuel tanks, and that was all that was done as far as the Cameron part goes.
So was that the closest you saw to any action as far as
yeah,
that type of action?
At nighttime, you could see the tracers from stuff going on in the sky. That's about it. The other side of the bay.
Did you mentioned the steaks were good. Did you try any of the local food or
No,
no?
just American food.
Just American, okay.
Just what we had.
And during that time period, were you awarded any medals or citations?
Not that I know of. It came, nothing that we wore.
So as you wrapped up your time in Vietnam then, you were there how long, actually, in Vietnam?
Actually, last 3 days being a full year.
Okay. And then from there, where did you go?
Then I was assigned to Fort Sam Houston.
Okay.
And that's all I knew then.
Yeah. And then,
San Antonio, Texas.
Mm-hmm. And what did you do there?
Well, there we had a month off, 30 days off leave before I went there. So I started there actually in May. And I was assigned to data processing at 4th Army headquarters. And it was across the street from what they called the quadrangle, like a little fort thing, because there's walls on all the way around it.
Mm-hmm.
4 walls all the way around it. And you had to go through a guard to get in. And my job at the data processing was typing covers for things going out. So I worked with a guy that I became really good friends with. We did stuff together besides the work. I went with him and his wife that didn't speak real good English. They were a Mexican couple. And we ended up going with them to her parents' town in Laredo, Mexico, through Laredo, Texas. So that was pretty neat too. It's really true Mexican food that we got samples on. It was good. And then, of course, there's all civilians that I worked with. There's 3 women and the guy that I worked with in data processing.
Okay. And how long were you there at Sam Houston, Fort Sam Houston?
The rest of the time, probably about 6 months.
Okay. All right. So your time there is coming to a close. Then what did you do? Did you process out of the service or move on to somewhere else for a short time?
Well, while I was there, I forgot to mention what else I was assigned to. 4th Army headquarters, I was assigned to the Honor Guard. I was a squad leader, in a 3rd squad leader in Honor Guard. And I had about four guys in each squad, I think, besides myself. And there was a hemisphere going on at the time while I was there. Not like not as big as a World Fair, but a hemisphere where there's other continents.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was there, President Johnson paid a visit. And they had ceremonies that we were part of, before and after ceremonies. While he was doing his speaking, we never saw him, but we had the ceremonies before and after. So that was, I guess, a big deal. He was there, so that's why we had ceremonies for it, was part of it. And then later, the 4th Army General retired, and the ceremonies were in the quadrangle, and we were part of that during the ceremony. Mm-hmm. So General Westmoreland was General of the Army at the time. He was part of the ceremonies too. So he came in, and so he was a gung-ho guy. He came in a Jeep in fatigues and spit-shine boots, just like us. And so he has to do his inspection of the guard. So I was face to face with the General of the Army at one moment. That was pretty neat.
Yeah. All right. So honor guard duties in addition. That was, well, it was an honor probably for you.
Mm-hmm.
Did you? Yeah. Sounds like you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then after that came to a close, then where did you go?
Well, I came back home.
Came back home? Okay.
Yeah, I made E5. I remember that rank because I had to make that rank. You have to be, you get up to that point to E5 Specialist 5. You have to answer questions. There's a guy, there's U-shape with people all around asking different questions about different things, and you had to be up on the current events and for a lot of anything to do with the military, and so I had to answer all that, and so I made E5 about 5 weeks before I got out, which is pretty quick to make that rank. So I didn't have to do KP anymore, but I did have to do.
Yeah. All right. So you ended your service time and came home.
Mm-hmm.
And how did your family receive you, family and friends? How were they when you came home?
Not much different. You always hear about how bad you was treated when you go, because then you didn't, I didn't anyway, come back as a group.
Mm-hmm.
I came back as a friend of mine. Of course, we both got out at the same time. We went there at the same time and to Vietnam. But he is from Chicago, so we went from. We came back to processed out through. Let's see, where was it? Okay, Washington, Fort Lewis, Washington, and they flew out from there to Chicago. And from Chicago to Springfield, St. Louis was all Ozark Airlines back then. Small planes. I think green and white was there. I'm not sure of the colors of the plane, but no, probably less than 100. So they weren't very big. But wasn't any problems with people
doing protesting or anything like that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So after you came home, then what did you do? Did you immediately go and look for a job, or did you take some downtime first?
Well, my job in New Berlin, the grocery store, his kids has gotten older, and they was doing all the helping and stuff then. And have to skip back again. That remind me of something. I'd get letters from my mom and my dad. They'd write letters, and my mom would write in. While reading her stuff, her letters, who are these people she's talking about? I didn't recognize the names or anything. Finally, it dawned on me that she's talking about soap operas that she is watching. So, I don't know these people. She watched her soap operas, and okay, so that was her. Now, my dad one time mentioned my guy I worked for in New Berlin told him that he had hired four part-timers to take my place, and they couldn't do the job that I did. Four of them together. So, that sounded pretty good. So that's going back to that again.
Sure.
That reminded me. Now, my mom just said, I don't remember my dad, how that was, but everything's pretty normal, like it was before. But my former employer there had got me a job with Eisner's, chain store in Springfield. So I started working at Eisner's in Springfield, which was part of a Jewel Tea Company out of Chicago.
And is that, how long did you work with that the rest of your career, or?
No, Eisner's, I got where I started full time, and I had about 12 years in there, and Eisner's decided they didn't want full time, they wanted to go part time. So I was low seniority. I was in the union, but I was a low seniority of full time, and they just wanting to go to part time. So part timers were being hired, and then I was a low guy, so I was laid off for about a year at that time, I think, almost. But I didn't have to. So I was getting unemployment, and unemployment was for all the jobs available. I was making more unemployment than I would get for jobs I applied for, like fast food jobs. They was like management jobs. Fast food was they'd have to put in like 18 hours a day sometimes, and had it paid less than what I was getting unemployment. So I just stayed unemployment. I didn't have to take anything that wasn't as much money. So I ended up getting hired back because another new store opened, and I got hired back to work in that store. And during that, well, they had more different kinds of registers then, more of a computer operated, or not computer then yet, but it's different. They didn't have the key things that you punch and the door come open. So the electricity went off. They lost power, and so that took those out, and nobody knew how to work the old ones. So I got called up there to help operate some of the old ones. But then it was probably about 3 months altogether. I went to a different store from there, and then ended up laid off permanently from that.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
No. I've tried to join more last couple of years, the American Legion, but I wasn't signing anything local, coming out of Bloomington, Indiana. So I was the American Legion, and I said I'm not going to mess with them anymore. So I ended up, last year, they had Vietnam Veterans of America was in town for an annual convention thing. So I went down there, and I decided to join VVA, Vietnam Veterans of America. So I'm with them now. And with them, VFW, I just recently joined. So I'm with VFW here in Springfield.
Well, as you look back over your experiences in the military, what kind of a life lesson do you feel that you might have learned from those experiences?
Respect for authority. That's probably one thing. And I have to everything just right. My bills, the bills, I don't want anything bent. I have to be straight flat. No how corners will fold in, and have to be all facing the same way. And with military. That's part of the military. And my shirts, things in the closet, I have to be all facing the same way. Short sleeve shirts, button shirts, same all together, and the other shirts like what I'm wearing all of them together. And I alternate what I wear, and whenever washing's done, I put it back to go through these front ones I hadn't worn yet. And the pants the same way, I hang them off the same way, and
a lot of organization.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Drive my wife nuts.
All right. Well, do you have any last comments that you would like to say, just about the war in general, or?
Well, when I first got out of the Army, a lot of time. Reason I stayed in was because all the relation, aunts and uncles and cousins, reunions every year, and I felt I needed to be around all that. Because when growing up, we always went to, always visiting aunts and uncles and my grandparents, and every weekend my grandparents that lived in New Bern was my dad's side. And my grandparents on my mom's side was, they lived not real, probably about 20, 30 miles away. Every Sunday we'd visit there and see all a bunch of cousins. My mom was number 7 of 11 kids. My dad was the first of 15 kids, so I got a lot of aunts and uncles and first cousins. Like 40-something aunts and uncles, and of course everybody was living still then, and all my like 80-something first cousins, and so I haven't lost very many cousins yet, but a lot of my aunts and uncles are gone now, because they're all getting in their 80s and 90s.
Well, I want to thank you very much for your time, for coming and agreeing to tell your story, and thank you for your service to our country.
Okay.